Welcome, football fans, to the debut episode of the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. I'm your host, Dan Long, and on this weekly podcast, I'll be joined by NJ.com's 6 high school football writers to break down everything related to Garden State gridiron action, and we'll have all of New Jersey high school football covered each week this fall. We'll kick off our show by talking about our game of the week from week 1, as Don Bosco Prep traveled down the shore to take on Red Bank Catholic. And joining me to talk about that game of the week is Luis Torres. And Luis, Don Bosco Prep dominated from start to finish against the defending non-public B champs, and they issued a statement that was heard around the state that they're for real this year.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say it was a needed win, but the vibes were really high for Bosco right afterwards. I mean, they were coming off a really tough loss to Archbishop Hoban, Power in Ohio, in a game that Coach Dan Sabella was telling me was pretty sloppy. They weren't really at 100% in terms of kind of what they wanted to do in terms of the weather wasn't all that great. A lot of missed assignments, a lot of missed tackles, but what a difference a week does and what a difference being back home in the Garden State did for Bosco. I mean, it was just a dominant performance from the word go. They shut down Red Bank Catholic. I think RBC ran just one play in Bosco territory the entire game. I mean, that's a great performance from Bosco, especially with the schedule coming up that they have is pretty brutal. I mean, they got St. Anthony's this week, and then they got a bye week, and then they get into the Murderers Row schedule, of course, playing in the SFC in the United Red Division. I thought the offensive line did everything, had a great game. Colin Brennan, the running back, ran for over 130 yards, had a touchdown. Dante DeLuca as well ran for 2 scores. And the defense, I know Sabella was really high kind of on his linebackers in the secondary heading into the season, and he was curious to see how his defensive line was going to be heading into the year, especially the graduation of guys like Lamont Lester and Jordan Thomas, Lester now at Monmouth and Thomas now at Georgia. And you were there, you witnessed kind of how they were able to kind of dominate the trenches, and they played really well, got after Red Bank Catholic's quarterback and just forced and got a couple turnovers. Special teams was great. So overall, it was a needed win for Don Bosco. And I know Sabella was extremely pleased with kind of how his team kind of performed that night.
Definitely, they looked like they dominated all 3 phases of the game, starting off with the opening kickoff, that they had great coverage, and then RBC really struggled mightily, Luis, all night long to just execute punting-wise, whether it be Don Bosco Prep deflections or punts carrying into the back of RBC players. It just seemed like they were behind the 8 ball the whole time. How young is RBC, and how do you think Coach Lang is going to look at this and say, all right, you flush that one down the toilet, and now you got to try to bounce back after taking on a Don Bosco Prep team that was looking to make a statement in that only the 3rd all-time matchup between the 2 schools?
Yeah, RBC's young this year. Definitely a little bit different team than what I've seen and kind of what we've seen the last couple of years. I mean, they are the defending non-public B champions, finished top 5 last year in the state. Definitely some trying times right now for the Caseys, and I know Coach Lang he's a good coach. He's going to get his kids and his team ride together. They probably learned a lot about themselves, match it up against a bigger, faster, and more physical Don Bosco team. I'd expect Red Bank Catholic. I mean, they got Long Branch this weekend. I expect them to bounce back and kind of get things going. I still expect them to be kind of a contender there in non-public B. I know Frankie Williams, the quarterback, 3-year starter, I think he's gonna find his way kind of with so many new pieces, kind of especially up front on the offensive line, starting so many sophomores and guys are going to get more experience, and it's definitely going to help down the road as the season kind of goes on. I think RBC will be fine, and they can only go up from here. I think that was a great learning experience. The first 2 weeks for them, playing Middletown out of Delaware, and then and then playing Don Bosco. I think everything will be fine for RBC as kind of the season goes on. And they got another Bergen County Power coming up in a couple of weeks, and Paramus Catholic, who looks pretty good so far. So I think that will be more of a test, and I think RBC will be more ready for that matchup than they were against Bosco.
And is it possible, do you think, in your mind, even though we have them ranked number 5 in our NJ.com top 20, that maybe Bosco is flying under the radar a bit, whether it be because of the likes of Bergen Catholic, DePaul Catholic, St. Joe's garnering more headlines up north, and then coming off that opening loss against Archbishop Hoban? Is this kind of a case of Bosco is fine with being off the radar and just doing their business, knowing that that gauntlet awaits them?
I think so. You also probably got to include Del Barton in there now, especially what they were coming off the year they were last year, 10-2, and Del Barton and Bosco kind of scrimmaged there a couple of weeks ago. That in a scrimmage that I was at, I think they're fine flying under the radar. I think Bergen Catholic deserves all the headlines they've gotten the last couple of years because they are the three-time defending state champions. You saw what DePaul did last week. Did good counts out of Maryland. They have so many weapons, and of course Augie Hoffman's back at St. Joe's. I think Sabella's fine, kind of with Bosco flying under the radar because he knows how talented his team is, and they're young in certain spots, but he knows they're very talented. They got some speed, they got some physicality. The offensive line probably isn't the same offensive line that they had a couple of years ago with Chase Basantes and Chris Moreno, but that type of offensive line isn't all that. Those don't really come around often, but they're good, and I think he's fine with the Ironman kind of flying under the radar because you know what, they're going to be well coached and they're going to be in a lot of games this year, and they're going to definitely look to win all those games against the Bergens, the Joes, and the DePauls and the Bartons.
Well, shifting gears now after we've just been talking about Don Bosco Prep out of the Super Football Conference, we'll welcome in a couple more of our beat writers here to talk a little more Super Football Conference action from the beginning of this season. We'll welcome in Ryan Patty and Mike Kinney. First off, Ryan, for you got a chance to see a matchup in Hudson County with Union City taking on St. Peter's Prep. Obviously, for St. Peter's Prep, a nightmare season a season ago that was totally unlike them. Having to try to bounce back after a hard defeat in the first week of the season, week 0, losing a shootout, 48-47 against Paramus Catholic. And then they have to bounce back against a team that's coming off a sectional title, their first ever in program history from last year for Union City. What did you see with the Marauders bringing home their first win of the season?
Yeah, I think this was an interesting matchup in a number of ways. I think most importantly, this is big for St. Peter's Prep's defense. They bounced back. They were kind of overwhelmed a little bit against Paramus Catholic in that week 0 matchup, but they come into the matchup against Union City. They're a really good wing T offense. It's a different game plan against a wing T versus what you'd normally see in the United Divisions, more spread. You don't really game plan for the wing T and really the ground game as a whole in the United Divisions, but or at least like that heavy of a ground game. But what I think is most important for St. Peter's Prep in these first 2 games of the season is the improved quarterback play of Tyler Bell, junior dual threat, 9 passing touchdowns in his first 2 games, 2 rushing and only 1 interception. I believe those 9 passing touchdowns are more than he had passing his entire season last year. So when you're getting quarterback play like that, you better believe you're going to win more than 1 game this year. And I think they're actually going to give a lot of problems to teams in those 2 United divisions. And for Union City, I don't see this as that big of a deal. Coach Wilbur Valdez knows what he's doing. He wants to get his team tested. He wants those measuring stick moments for his team in these early games in the season. And I think that's what this is. I mean, St. Peter's Prep can recruit size and speed, and Union City can't. St. Peter's can go all over the state and get those kind of kids. So a good measuring stick moment, and Union City is going to learn from this for sure.
Luis, welcome you back here. For the second straight week, you got a chance to see Pope John, and they had a tough challenge in the week 0 matchup that we broadcast as one of our games of the week against DePaul, who is, flying high. Well, their door prize for week 1 is having to take on a Paramus Catholic team that is starting to emerge as maybe a dark horse contender and somebody that could really make some noise. And now that they're in non-public B in Paramus Catholic, what did you see with the Paladins coming away with a win against Pope John in week 1?
Saw the Xavier Williams show. You talk about an impressive football player, and especially also he's a wrestler. Air Force commit. I mean, he had 264 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns against Pope John. And I know Coach Greg Russo was pretty high. This is his 3rd year back there at PC. He was the offensive coordinator for when they were winning a couple of state championships in the mid 2010s. And he told me before the season he was pretty high heading into this year, and he felt more comfortable with this team because these were his kids. And he realized with guys like Malachi Goodman, left tackle, massive, 6'6", over 300 pounds, very well built together. He's going to Penn State, and he knew with 3 other returning starters on the offensive line, that they were going to be able to run the ball this year. And through 2 games, I mean, Xavier Williams has rushed for 516 yards and 8 touchdowns, I think it is. And he was phenomenal on Saturday at Pope John. Showed an impressive burst of speed, especially for a kid who's that physical and is that strong, and especially in his lower body with his wrestling background. He's also a track and field kid. But I was impressed with the running game. I think quarterback Crew Cologne is in his second year in the system, and for Russo, anytime he's had a quarterback that spent at least 2 years in his offensive system, kind of with Enzo that he had in Northern Highlands, they've kind of taken that massive leap and made fewer mistakes. And so far, Crew Cologne's taking care of the ball and is making some plays. And anytime you're having difficulty throwing the ball, just hand it off to number 2 and let him run behind number 71. Very impressed kind of with PC's offense, and they got some stops on defense. I know they were in that massive shootout in week 0 against St. Peter's Prep, where there was over 1,000 yards of total offense, but they were able to force, I think it was 5 turnovers against Pope John, especially in the fourth quarter when it started pouring rain. And I started making the joke to kind of the staff. I think my jeans weighed 25 pounds afterwards because it was just pouring rain for 40 minutes. But PC's 2-0. They began last year 2-0 before they kind of ran into some issues, dealt with some injuries. But they're off this week, and I think they're going to get healthier, and kind of get ready here as they play St. Joe's here on the 21st.
Ryan, as much as Paramus Catholic is having a great start to their season, what about the Campanelli brothers having an unbelievable weekend this past weekend for New Jersey football on the national stage? You had Nick and his DePaul Catholic Spartans pulling the upset against Good Counsel of Olney, Maryland, and then Bergen Catholic, led by Vito Campanelli, march into Massillon Football Town, USA, and emerge with a victory and knock off the Massillon Tigers for the first time in 4 years in their home stadium. Talk a bit about what this means for New Jersey football, and specifically that family and the Campanellis on the grand stage of things, and what this does, you think, grand scheme-wise, for New Jersey football and its reputation.
Yeah, these are 2 huge wins for both programs. Bergen wipes out a team that was ranked 9th in the High School Football America 300 at the time in Massillon. They went through their star transfer, Donovan Catholic transfer, junior Najee Calhoun, had 43 carries for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns. And there was a monsoon in the middle of the game, and that kind of played to their advantage. I mean, we know how good Dominic Campanelli can spin the ball. We know how dynamic Quincy Porter is, and some of the other targets in that receiving core, and Quincy's brother, Brian Porter, Anthony Perotti, among other names. But when Bergen wants to pound the rock, they can do it at an elite level. We've seen that year after year under Vito Campanelli. And as for DePaul, they beat the number 10 team in Good Counsel, as Luis mentioned earlier, and they did it in all 3 phases. Derek Zambit, 3 touchdowns, 2 passing, and 1 rushing. And then they lean heavily on Nolan James, like Bergen did with Najee Calhoun in the Buckeye State. Nolan James, 35 carries, 174 yards, and a touchdown. And the defense came up huge. Right before halftime, 10-7, Good Counsel leads. They block a DePaul punt. And then DePaul cracks down on defense. The very next play, right inside the 10-yard line, interception from Marquette Dorsey in the end zone. Gets DePaul back the ball. They're able to milk out the clock in the rest of the half, get down 10-7. You kind of exhale. The game didn't get away from you, and they absolutely put their foot on the gas in the second half. A lot of pressure on the Good Counsel quarterback by that DePaul front. I think you have to be very impressed with what both programs did. But for DePaul, this is something that simply hasn't happened for them. Nick Campanelli has been patiently waiting for this huge win over this national power, and he got it. And both teams are just kind of, I think they're going to carry this momentum into the rest of the season.
And both those teams, much like their North Jersey Catholic brethren, are going to be taking on the New York Catholic schools this week, and which is going to be fun to see all those different matchups ensue. Now it's my honor to bring in Mike Kinney. And Mike, what can you tell us about West Orange?
Yeah, expectations are high, and I don't think it's unreasonable. They were 5-5 last year, and a lot of people would say, well, how can expectations be high off a 5-5 season? But the 5-5 season was kind of remarkable. They've had a lot of injury issues with their quarterback position the last couple of years. And Charlie Lamort came in about halfway through last season after he transferred and did a fantastic job toward the end of the season. They looked like the West Orange team that I think we can all expect to see more of this year. And I think they might have surprised Passaic Tech a little bit. Now, here's the deal. West Orange was ranked in our top 20 when they played that game. They fell out of the ranking against Passaic Tech, but I think at the same time, they gained plenty as far as what they can expect from themselves as a team. Terrell Wilfong is one of the best receivers in the state. He's got 5 touchdown receptions already. He and Charlie Lamort have already combined. They're an excellent tandem, and everybody knows it. The key for West Orange is going to be develop a running game. They had a little. They lost some veterans from last year on the ground, so they're going to have to really develop that running game so that Terrell Wilfong doesn't get double teamed all game. They have other receivers, there's no question about it, and Charlie Lamort is a good enough quarterback to find them. But Chris Barino and Farad Green and Khalid Roan, they have to establish a sound ground game for them to be a consistent winner. I think it can happen, and because defensively they're going to be tough. I think the Passaic Tech game showed West Orange a lot of what they are right now and what they can be, which I think is a team that contends for a sectional title.
And Ryan, you saw Passaic Tech in person. How good are they, and what is going to be their identity, you think, after coming off back-to-back sectional championship seasons and just being the runners-up to one of the best teams that we've seen in quite some time in the public school ranks in Toms River North?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tremendous win for Passaic Tech, and especially after last week's sad, news with the shooting post game, for them to just respond in this way is incredible. And I think what's even more incredible is they haven't lost to West Orange since 2006. And Mike just hyped up West Orange. That's a great program with a lot of talent to come out of there. So for Passaic Tech to have that long of a winning streak against them, and they have a similar one against Union City, for it to go back that far is absolutely incredible. And I think what's been very impressive with Passaic Tech thus far is that quarterback Gabe Miles has kind of stole the show offensively. Mikhail Taylor did a very good job last year, kind of managing games and making clutch plays on third down to move the chains and just keep drives alive, because Trayshawn Dye was kind of that guy last year, the guy they leaned on. But Gabe Miles is becoming that guy this year. He had 4 touchdowns in this game. 3 went to sophomore Ian McDuffie, who head coach Matt Demarest is very, very high on. And the other touchdown was a 99-yarder, longest play in school history, to senior Joel Perez. Went down the sideline, beat the whole defense, split 2 defenders. Really a fantastic play. And the defense got a clutch stop late. And it kind of just goes back to that winning mindset, that, great culture that Matt Demarest has built in Wayne. And, this team just refuses to lose. And it's absolutely incredible. They're back in our top 20. And I mean, here they are again in Group 5.
That's a look at the Super Football Conference for Week 1 action. We'll be back to look at now the NJIC, as we're going to be seeing some of the smaller teams take center stage, and that's going to be a lot of fun to look at that here. So the NJIC takes center stage. We were able to see them in Week 0 action when it was Beckton taking on Lyndhurst, but the news that really reverberated around the NJIC is Waldwick ending Rutherford's 23-game regular season NJIC win streak. So the Bulldogs, who have been the kings of the NJIC the last 3 years, suffered defeat for the first time in a while, and bringing back Luis Torres and Ryan Patty for their coverage of the NJIC beat. Guys, what did you see from that result? And was that a shocking result? And is that going to send waves throughout the NJIC that maybe there's a new king this season for some of the smaller schools in North Jersey? Luis, your thoughts first about Waldwick's big win.
I think I was a little surprised. I mean, Rutherford's been the kings of the NJIC the last 3 years, but of course, when it comes with the public schools, especially the small public schools, it's always seems to be cyclical. And what a win for Waldwick and Coach Dan DeStassi's first ever game. He ends Rutherford's 23-game winning streak. DeStassi is kind of a Dan Sabella's disciple. He's always been with Sabella. He played for Sabella at Bogota, followed him from Paramus Catholic, Richfield Park, and he spent the last 5 seasons at Don Bosco before now taking the head job here at Waldwick. And they were able to run the ball. They ran for 325 yards. Senior Ryan Natoli kind of stepped up, especially after a couple injuries that Waldwick had early in the game. and they just kept feeding him. I mean, he had 16 carries for 205 yards and 2 touchdowns, and picked up a massive win. Of course, with how the NJIC does is they take their 4 division champions and they now and they kind of put those division champions and put them in the NJIC playoffs, and you kind of play for a championship. So right now, Walwick's got a inside track right now to the Liberty Division title. They kind of got to handle business here. They got a tough game against Glen Rock. On the Rutherford side, I spoke with Steve Dunn. I mean, Steve Dunn said he's starting 2 freshmen and 7 sophomores, and there's 2 other sophomores they got significant playing time. So it's a little bit different of a Rutherford team that's trying to find their way. He hopes that by week 3 or week 4, they're kind of playing with more confidence and kind of playing, get more chemistry and playing a lot better as they kind of get more of that experience. And the last time they lost a matchup to an NJIC opponent was back in 2021, which was the Hasbrook Heights. But Rutherford, that was the starter. That was the start of winning 3 consecutive NJIC titles because they were able to bounce back, find their way, got some help with some other division losses, division opponents, and they were able to win an NJIC title. So that's the hope that Rutherford is able to do that this year. But they're going to need some help, and they're going to have to take care of the business on their end as well.
And Luis, you were mentioning with Rutherford losing that game and just the divisional makeup of the NJIC, how these games matter so much. We talked about that together with the beginning of our season with the Beckton versus Lyndhurst game, which is a rivalry renewed that dates back to even when it was not even Beckton High School, it was East Rutherford High School. How much that right out of the gate, a loss like that, it doesn't railroad the rest of your season, but it may cost you a chance of playing in the NJIC playoffs. Talk a bit about how important it is to win your divisional games, even more so than compared to other conferences around the Garden State.
I think Ryan could also speak to this, is every game matters because you want to win a championship, even if it's an in-season championship like the NJIC, which is so unique. And there probably isn't many places around the country that kind of has their division makeup like the NJIC, which makes small school football up in Bergen County and a little bit of Morrison Passaic County so unique. Like all these teams want to win the NJIC championship, and they compete and they play hard, and every game matters, and that's kind of what you want, and it's kind of what you want to see.
Ryan, the same thing. How devastating is it if you're one of these teams that you feel like you're going into the season that you could be one of the favorites, not only to bring home the NJIC title, but that your hopes of even qualifying for a chance to get that championship might go by the wayside in your first 2 weeks of the season? What are you seeing in the NJIC, and is this really going to be signaling a potential change in the guard with Rutherford going down?
Yeah, I mean, Luis and I every week go over the games, in each of our conferences, NJIC and SFC, and that's the result that might have surprised us the most. But I mean, and it's because Rutherford's been a Fortune 500 company in the NJIC the past couple of years, and we've seen great players come through the program like Ryan Ward, Van Weber, and you look at the game last year against Park Ridge, where you might have looked at that game and said, they might be an underdog here, and they go in with a third string quarterback at the time, and Miles Balchan, and it's downpouring. He's completing passes in the rain, and they're bottling up a solid Park Ridge offense with Cole Hughes and Luke McPhee, and they've always just been able to figure it out. And even though they lose this game, I still think that they're going to be able to figure it out. And I mean, you talked about the Beckton and Lyndhurst game, Dan, and I mean, you got to see it firsthand. What an incredible game! And I was talking to Lyndhurst head coach Rich Toro before the season at NJIC Media Day, and he was saying, yeah, I mean, this game's a big deal. And he called Jack Mayer, Beckton's head coach, that is, right after the game came out, and he said, hey, like, we're playing each other week 0, and this was back in January. And you look at that game, Beckton quarterback John Palsey's back for them, and he had 2 touchdowns, and that game kind of comes down to the wire. It's 14-0. Lyndhurst scores, and then they drive down the field, almost score again, but Beckton strips them near the goal line. Julian Perry jumps on it, and Beckton follows it up the next week with the win over Garfield. And I mean, what a start to the season for Beckton, and what a start to the season in the NJIC. I mean, just craziness, and it's all living up to the hype so far.
So we move now from North Jersey down to South Jersey and take a look at the WJFL. And joining me to talk all about it are our experts in Kevin Minnick and Bill Evans. And Kevin, what have you been seeing so far this season? Certainly when we have a couple of top 20 powerhouses in Millville and Winslow, they've been looking good so far here. And what is their potential like for the rest of this season?
Well, Dan, right now, those two teams are highly ranked in our top 20, Millville at number 7, Winslow at number 8. And they play in the American Division, which is arguably the best division in the West Jersey Football League and could very well be the best division that the league has ever seen. Those two teams are the class right now, I'd say, of the division of the 5 teams. But you've got a St. Augustine team at number 10 in the rankings that's playing very, very well. You got a defending sectional champion in Cherokee, which is always extremely well coached and dominates along the lines. They're looking really good right now. And the same with Mainland. Mainland's a defending Group 4 state champion who's now won 16 games in a row. So, while Millville and Winslow, I think, are maybe the class of the division, then the other 3 teams are only a smidgen behind. So, while we kind of like Millville and Millville and Winslow to kind of be the top 2 teams right now, I don't think the winner of the division is going to go undefeated. I think that there's so much balance and so much talent around all those teams that it could go any direction, any weekend. But, right now, Millville is just fabulous. You look at Millville and you immediately think of Latsier Brooks, 3-time All-State wide receiver headed to Alabama. And then you look at Winslow. Winslow's got a dynamic sophomore quarterback in Jalen Parker, and it always has weapons on the outside. Cam Miller this year probably being the best right now, heading to Wisconsin. But, those two teams are extremely athletic. They're extremely quick. And, when that game rolls around in a couple of weeks, that's going to be one that people are going to have their popcorn ready for.
You were mentioning, Kevin, that what makes those two teams in Millville and, looking what has been able to be done by Winslow over the last couple of years, what makes them special? Do they have that clear separation you feel as the top 2 in the area, or are there still teams that in that conference can make their name and make a statement, as we saw even last year, where Mainland was the one that was crowned as the top dogs in knocking off, Millville on the way to a state championship and a dominant performance at Rutgers against Rampo. What makes those two teams so special in your mind as you're getting ready for that collision of sorts in a couple of weeks?
I think the biggest thing with Millville is it's pure athleticism. There are athletes at every position. Every kid is quick. Every kid, and they play with an aggression and a physicality that a lot of teams don't play with, and they can get up on teams really quick. And like I said, when you look at Millville, you look at Brooks, but they have a ton of other kids that are really, really good football players as well, and they've all bought into the culture and the philosophy of what they're trying to do down there. And in Winslow, I think the big difference in Winslow, especially over the past couple of years, is that Bill Belton, former Penn State standout, also played at Winslow, quarterback, running back type of hybrid type of player at Winslow. He's changed the culture there. And, they've got some athletes as well. I don't know if they have the same level of athletes as Millville does, if you were to go down the pecking order, but they are extremely talented too. They're dynamic, and they play just as aggressive as Millville does. So I think, those two teams are going to obviously be 2 teams to keep a serious eye on in that division all season. And, like we said, when they finally match up in a couple of weeks, it's going to be a fantastic game.
Bill Evans, we were referencing St. Augustine as one of those teams that have really stood out in the last couple of seasons, certainly down south. The question that I'm always asked when I'm on the road broadcasting, and certainly when I've had the honor of broadcasting down at St. Augustine, is do they have enough now to close that gap between themselves and the North Jersey parochial schools, the non-publics that they're going to be competing with in non-public A? After those reclassifications, they did not get any help, that they're still with the big boys in non-public A. What do you see from St. Augustine this year? And do you feel like they're making those necessary steps to try to close that gap, whether it be depth or talent, to try to catch up with those teams and maybe stake their claim to make some noise this year?
Well, that's kind of been the question for them about the last 10 years. And, unlike the North Jersey teams who get to kind of beat up on each other, they really only get one or two chances in the playoffs. And I really think that they have held their own. You go back to 2019, had a win on the road at Seton Hall Prep, was leading St. Peter's with 5 minutes to go and had the ball. Ended up losing that, and St. Peter's ended up winning the non-public A and number one in the state. They beat Del Barton 2 years ago. They beat St. Peter's last year. So I really think that they have kind of hung in there with many of those top teams. I still think they're probably, a step behind, the Boscos and Bergens and St. Joe's and maybe even Del Barton now, even though, they did have the win over Del Barton a couple years ago. I don't think that's a knock on them. I think you could say that about, most of the rest of the, the state. I think they are in that second tier with say Paramus Catholic and St. Peter's. That's I think where they'll end up. But I think they'll have a tough matchup once they get to the quarterfinals. And they've got some teams down here. That public schools. Unlike maybe the North where you don't get the Bergens and the Boscos playing a lot of publics. They've got some competition from the publics, be it Millville, be it Cherokee, be it Winslow, that they're going to see this year. Very strong on defense. They've only given up 6 points so far in 2 games. Just coming off a dominating win over Paul VI, beat Donovan Catholic, who they lost to twice last year. Good linebackers in Mike Bonchik and Julian Jambuzzi, top defensive line prospect in Damari Simeon, and they have a really good running back, maybe the best in their division in Julian Turney. So I think they're going to be very competitive this year. Again, maybe slightly below that top tier, but definitely in that second tier with a lot of the other good teams in non-public A.
So we move to the Shore Conference now, and of course we bring in the expert on everything related to the Shore Conference and the incomparable Joe Zadalis. And Joe, well, a lot of more questions that maybe some people will have after we reference that game of the week that we started off our podcast with Don Bosco's 44-0 win against Red Bank Catholic. Does that mean to you that Thomas River North is clearly the team to beat this year in the Shore Conference?
Absolutely, Dan. I think, some of the things Luis touched on about Red Bank Catholic that are important to remember. Red Bank Catholic couldn't run the ball effectively last year. They lost their big play wide receiver who could stretch the field. And just look at the quality and the number of players Red Bank Catholic has lost the last 2 years. And those are a lot of holes to plug. I think they're going to be fine. They're whether they stay in the top 20 or not, I don't know, because they do have an upcoming game against rival Rumson. They still have Donovan Catholic. They should be able to win every one of their games. The Long Branch game this weekend is a little iffy because Long Branch puts up a ton of points. So I think Red Bank Catholic will right the ship a little bit. How far they can go, of course, depends on how Frankie Williams plays, their outstanding quarterback. But I just think Red Bank Catholic has to find a way to run the ball a little bit so people aren't ganging up on Frankie and their wide receivers.
I had mentioned at the tail end of the broadcast when we were finishing up the game down in Red Bank that, well, you certainly are not going to have the case of all the other teams in the Shore Conference feeling sorry for RBC these days after they're usually the ones putting the hurting on opponents. What do you see then from around the conference? Is it clearly Thomas River North, and then there's a gap between them and everybody else in the conference?
I think you hit the nail right on the head there, Dan. I mean, Thomas River North is 28-2 the last 3 years, and I feel kind of bad hearing Luis and Ryan talk about Passaic Tech, and standing in front of Passaic Tech again is Thomas River North, the two-time defending Group 5 champion. And I've had a couple of people already come up to me and go, this Thomas River North team is better than the one last year. And I would sound the buzzer there and go, it's not better, it's different. Thomas River North, the Wizard of Oz, Thomas River North coach Dave Oyserwitz is at it again, but this is a little different offense. Last year with Micah Ford, our two-time player of the year, now at Stanford, it was first and goal from anywhere. Now they're a little more methodical, but these are the numbers that are most interesting to me. Thomas River North had 450 yards in the first 2 games last year. This year, they have 533 yards. Their leading rusher is their quarterback, TJ Valerio. So he was Dan, he was 4-1 last year when Micah Ford was hurt. They he proved himself to his teammates. He proved himself to opponents. Dave Oyserowitz has said all along he's a better thrower than Micah Ford was, which is a little scary. Now, I think Conservative North has undefeated Jackson Memorial this year. I do not think it will be much of a challenge for the Conservative North offense. I do think it may be a little bit of a challenge for the Conservative North defense because Jackson Memorial has one of the finest running backs in the state in sophomore Jonah Glenn, who has 441 yards in his first 2 games. He went over the 2,000-yard mark last week already. So let's see what Conservative North can do when they're confronted, with a top quality running back on defense. That to me has been the biggest surprise for North, the defense. They've only allowed 2 points in their first 2 games. Downingtown is still ranked in the top 20 in Pennsylvania. Last year, that team was 11-1, and Conservative North destroyed them.
A team that we're going to be seeing a couple of times coming up in the next couple of weeks on our NJ.com broadcast games of the week is Rumson Fairhaven. What have you got in there, Joe, in terms of looking at what the Bulldogs are up to this season? Obviously, we're going to see them against Middletown South, and then later on this season, we're also going to have their broadcast game against Red Bank Catholic. Is Rumson Fairhaven a team that can contend for the ultimate spot with Toms River North?
I don't see it that way. I think RBC is again a contender in Group 2, and they've reached a Group 2 final the last 2 years, and I don't think any team in New Jersey has suffered more excruciating losses in the final than Rumson has. I saw Rumson last week against Point Pleasant Borough, and they were amazing in the first half. Their 3-year starter quarterback, Owen O'Toole, was brilliant. He hit his 3rd read on his first touchdown, his 2nd read on his 2nd touchdown, and then laid a perfect pass into the end zone for his 3rd. The one thing that was good news for Rumson is they got their ground game going right away. Kellen Murray had 146 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think the concern for Rumson here is defense. Point Pleasant Borough is a double wing, triple option team that essentially is one-dimensional. And Toms River North couldn't stop them in the second half. They needed a 56-yard touchdown run from Murray with 1:50 left to ice the victory. But I think Rumson is always one of those teams, Dan, that gets better week by week by week. And I am sure Jeremy Schulte and his defensive staff are going to tinker with some things. I do think Rumson has an outstanding offensive line. And the big game for them is clearly RBC, but I really feel like Rumson and RBC are playing for number 2 in the Shore, with the exception maybe of a Donovan Catholic game at the end of the year. I don't see anybody being able to keep pace with Toms River North.
So last and certainly not least, we take a look at the Big Central Conference as our final wrap-up of all of the football conferences in the Garden State. And again, I'm joined by the legendary Mike Kinney. And Mike, some news of note, certainly JP Stevens, they snapped a 42-game losing streak by defeating Bound Brook, and that's big news for them. And, that's a big hang with them after having endured some losing seasons in a row. But to break that and get a win's got to feel really good for JP Stevens.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The good feel story at the end of last season was Highland Park ending their 49-game losing streak. And then the spotlight, the unfortunate spotlight was then on JP Stevens, which ended the season with, which had 42 losses. So they were kind of looking at Highland Park as the team that was preventing everybody from looking at them and going, why can't these guys win? But JP Stevens, they came really close last year. They have done, Jason George has done a tremendous job. In his first year last year, he did a tremendous job of making them more competitive, keeping them in games. Now, their last 4 games last year were winnable games, JP Stevens, but they didn't know how to win. Kids came up through that program as freshmen, as sophomores, as juniors. Seniors last year had never won. They hadn't won since 2018 a game. So finally, last year, they got close to winning. They learned the tools of what's necessary to stay in the game through at least 3 quarters. And then finally here against Bound Brook, they not only stayed in for 3 quarters, but they got it done in overtime. Marquise Webb ran for 2 touchdowns. He's a kid who stayed through the program, blue and true and stayed, and he's a senior now. Same thing with Quadir Johnson, a kid, 4-year guy, stayed with the program. I can only imagine what the kids in school were saying. Why do you do this to yourself? Why don't you transfer? But they didn't. And Quadir scored a touchdown in the third quarter, and in overtime, he scored the decisive 2 points, and losing streak over JP Stevens goes on to Voorhees now with a 1-game winning streak. They're feeling great right now about how things are going. You got to end that. Tip the cap to the Big Central Conference for creating divisions that give some teams that are suffering a chance to win after a 2-year period, a chance to get into a division that is a little more competitive for them. They're playing a smaller Bound Brook. JP Stevens is a Group 5 school. They don't play like a Group 5 school, and I don't mean competitively. I just mean number-wise. They're more like a Group 2 or Group 3 because that's just the way it is now at JP Stevens. The demographics have changed. They don't have a lot of kids playing football right now as they used to 20 years ago, 15 years ago. So it's just a more equitable situation for them now. And now they have a win. We'll see what happens over this season, but they're feeling great, and it's a good story.
A team that is synonymous with winning is Phillipsburg, and they got off to a great start to this 2024 season with a dominant victory against Westfield. What do the Stateliners and the Stateliner fans have to look forward to this season, you think, in your mind?
Jet Genovese being Jet Genovese. He's his third. When you have a quarterback coming back for a second year, you're strong. If you've had a team that's pretty good, you have a kid coming back from a third year from a winning tradition, and a kid who's obviously been central to that winning. You're feeling really good about yourself. The only thing I would say that Phillipsburg may be a little concerned about is, will the running game be established? Now, Jet does a great job. As a sophomore, Jet did a great job of running the ball, and I think from that point, he was told last year, don't do it, Jet. Stay healthy. They had a dynamic running game last year. This year, they have plenty of guys to catch the football. Matthew Skirbo Jr. being one of those guys. He's a sensational receiver, and they've got linemen back. Felix Matos is another good receiver. If their running game ends up being strong, nearly as strong as last year. This is another team. They lost in the sectional final last year to Union City. They came back. They won the game that really matters to them, the Thanksgiving Day game against Easton. Sam Deck last week against Westfield rushed for 180 yards and a couple touchdowns. So, this is a team. It's one of the top programs always in the state. But now it's a team on a high curve right now, high winning curve. When that happens, you've got guys underneath. You never know how good they are because they're playing underneath kids who are, sensational football players who are getting to sectional finals. Sam Deck is one of those kids. I mean, he had a great game against Westfield. Westfield lost some people. They're not quite the same team as they were last year, but yet they're pretty strong defensively. And that says a lot about their blocking and what they have. And it's also a credit to when you've got Genovese as the quarterback, you've got to respect his throwing ability. And that's going to open it up for a running back. I'm sure you, Dan, could run the ball for Phillipsburg right now.
Well, I don't know about that. I think I could
I can't. You
walking out of my house.
Give it a shot.
So we go from an experienced quarterback to one that is a freshman leading the way for St. Thomas Aquinas. What about that storyline?
Yeah, very surprising because in their first game against Mount St. Joseph of Maryland, Roman Blanks had a great year last year for St. Thomas. He led them to a 10-1 record. He had a fantastic year. He comes in being the guy that you're feeling really good about St. Thomas. St. Thomas, again, in the top 20 to start the season. They lost some people, but Chase Young is back as a skill guy. They have plenty of linemen back. They have defenders back. But you have Roman Blanks back. The kid passed for almost 2,000 yards last year, but he had a really awful first half against Mount St. Joseph. Now, Tariq Holman, Coach Coleman, and he said after the game, he said, hey, all my kids are ready to play. I trust them all. And if you're on my varsity team, you got to be ready to play. Zymir Weaver, a freshman, came in, and he had a phenomenal second half to get that back in the game. They lost the game, but then this past week against Lincoln of New York, wondering who's going to start, Roman Blanks started. Second half, Zymir Weaver came in. Zymir Weaver was 7-7 for 145 yards, and Roman Blanks played well. So 2 quarterbacks, not sure how Tariq's going to go the rest of the way, but this kid has proven himself. I mean, you come in a situation you're in as a freshman, and you have ice water in your veins, play the way you do, and use your receivers. He used a couple of different receivers too. It wasn't like he was looking for one guy. He played quarterback in that first outing. That's a great sign for St. Thomas because they do have other weapons back. And if you've got those two guys, sometimes that's a problem playing two quarterbacks. I don't think it's going to be. I guess it depends on how Roman Blanks accepts it, but Zamir Weaver looks like a real talent.
Well, this week with our two NJ.com football games of the week, we are staying in the Big Central for both of those games. The broadcast fans that certainly you could watch for free if you're a subscriber, both live and on demand. First off, we're going to be kicking it off a Friday night showdown. It's going to be Hillsboro. It's going to be at Ridge. It's going to be a whiteout. It's the Unico Bowl, the first ever existence of that matchup and that rivalry. What do you see on tap there, Mike, for that first game that we're going to be broadcasting on NJ.com, Hillsboro at Ridge?
A really good competitive game. I mean, last year Ridge was a really senior team, and they beat Hillsboro by a couple of touchdowns. I don't see that kind of game this year. Matter of fact, I would favor Hillsboro. Hillsboro began the season in our top 20, and they started the season in Somerville. They had a rough time. Now, Alex Riley, who was going to be the starting quarterback, he was a starting quarterback last year. He decided to just play baseball, and it was kind of a surprise, I think, within the program. So you lose a kid who was going to come back as a starting quarterback. They began the year a little differently that way. Ryan Seaman came in as the quarterback. He did a good job against Somerville, actually, but they were a little out of sync for the first half. They came back in the game. They almost won the game against Somerville in that game. If they had won it, I think that would have been a great thing. But maybe in hindsight, losing that game, a tough game, might actually help Hillsboro with some of the newer pieces that are there. They looked good. They looked competitive, but then they came back the next week and they won. Ridge, same kind of situation where they came in against St. Joe's Metuchen, a good St. Joe's Metuchen team. They lost a tough game. They got behind. They lost by 3 points. They're really going to come in against Hillsboro ready to play. They also lost some people, though. They lost Will Deedy, who was a 4-year ball player. They lost Ryan Olivo at quarterback, but they've got pieces in place. Hillsboro's got Jackson Jankowicz. You got a kid like that. That's a 3-year running back. Ridge has to deal with him, but Ridge has Aiden Stieglitz, and they've got Ryan Turner. They've got people who can play. It's going to be a competitive game. It's going to be a really fun game, and it's for a great cause too. It's, as you said, it's the Unico Bowl. It's for the Brooke Healy Foundation to fight pediatric cancer. So these guys know it. They get it. They get it as a team. They get it as a program. What's really important. They're going to strap it up and play tough football. It's going to be a fun game.
And Mike, shifting scenes to then Saturday afternoon, again, big Central Conference matchup. It's going to be Elizabeth taking the trip over to Westfield. We talked about Westfield losing in their game against Phillipsburg. Can the Blue Devils right the ship, or is Elizabeth going to be a team that's going to come in there trying to get their second win of the season?
Both things are right there, Dan. Westfield will right the ship. Westfield lost a pretty big game to Phillipsburg last year, too. And they were a pretty good team. Westfield, first of all, there's one thing. They're home. When they're home, they're a different team. They're playing a rivalry game against Elizabeth. That's going to really prepare them. Mahoney Stadium in Phillipsburg is one of the toughest places to go play. I don't care who you are. I don't care how good you are. I've been to games at Mahoney Stadium where Phillipsburg was not the favorite team, and it's hard. It's loud. It's loud for 4 quarters. The band doesn't stop playing. It's packed with people. How many high school stadiums have season ticket holders in there, right? It's that kind of a place. It can be a very overwhelming place. Well, now they're back home. They're feeling good. Same time, Elizabeth feels great. Elizabeth last year was an okay team. They were coming around. They were under 500, but second year under Coach Fiore, but they lost a lot of close games, a lot of winnable games. I kept looking at their season last year and go, they're going to turn it. They're going to turn it. They're going to turn it. They never really did. But with the young team they had, it was a proving ground that I think is carried over to this year, where those guys now are saying, we know how to win these games now. And Arik Fleming is not a freshman anymore at quarterback. He's a sophomore. Arik Fleming is an exceptional talent at quarterback. Coach Fiore, John Fiore, said to me before the season, he said, he's going to break every passing record there is in Elizabeth. There's no question about it. He had a great year last year, well over 1,000 yards passing, showed composure well beyond what a junior in his third year playing might show. Tremendous, and an arm that reminds you of P.J. Walker. Now, P.J. Walker was a quarterback at Elizabeth, so he's going to break his record. We're talking about a pretty special young man, and he is. And Westfield's going to have to deal with him. So Westfield's going to have to try to control the football and keep it out of his hands. But this is a big rivalry game again. Elizabeth, anytime you're looking at old Union County Conference games, it's going to be a great game. It's going to be a big crowd. Saturday afternoon, old time football. I'm really looking forward to this game. Anytime I can go over to Gary Kaler Stadium on a Saturday afternoon, I'm counting on a pretty good competitive football game. Westfield is never a team you count out. They come off a loss, they're going to learn. They're smart, tough kids.
I was excited to call that game anyway on Saturday. You've got me even more pumped, Mike. So I'm ready to go for that one. And again, it's going to be a fun one to be back at Ridge for a big game and a great cause and whiteout. It's always a fun environment for that. And it's going to be our chance now to showcase this weekend the Big Central Conference as they take the stage on our NJ.com football games of the week. That again, fans, you can watch NJ.com/watch. It's free for subscribers. So make sure to tune in, and that will do it for our first ever edition of the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. I'd like to thank and give a shout out to all of our great colleagues here at NJ.com, Luis Torres, Ryan Patty, Mike Kinney, Kevin Minnick, Bill Evans, Joe Sedalis, and of course, this is all possible thanks to the help of Brian Dekine, who is our engineer here to get things going. So for all the guys, I'm Dan Long. We'll join you next week here on the Jersey Blitz to talk Jersey football. Take care, everybody.